The moment human warships translated into Elysian space, the rebels knew the war was over. In mere hours, the mighty Elysian Empire would be shattered beyond repair. For decades, the diverse rebel alliance had fought bravely against the technologically superior Elysians, their ragtag fleet suffering endless casualties. Rebel hulls burst apart under withering fire from the Empire's devastating particle beams and plasma torpedoes. Crews vaporized as Elysian missiles punched through feeble rebel shields. Escape pods were targeted and destroyed before helpless rebels could abandon ship. Zephyr, rising star of the Elysian Navy, savored the unfolding slaughter from the pristine bridge of his magnificent flagship Eternal Conquest. The rebels were on the brink of defeat, just as Zephyr had orchestrated with his brilliant tactics and ruthless strategies. Another victory to solidify his meteoric ascent to power. The Empire would reign supreme over the inferior races. But a curious reading on the sensor display gave Zephyr pause. Unknown vessels had just appeared at the fringes of the raging battle, ships of completely foreign design and origin. As Zephyr studied the mysterious newcomers, a sense of unease flickered across his blue face. His confidence began to unravel. These ships didn't match any known rebel configuration. In fact, they seemed far more advanced than the typical rebel scrap heaps. And they weren't heading to reinforce the battered rebel lines. No. These unidentified ships were on a direct intercept course, heading straight for the mighty Elysian fleet. Zephyr suddenly realized who they must be. Humans, the reclusive species that rarely left their isolated corner of the galaxy. Why would they intervene now? To aid the pitiful rebellion. Unfathomable. No matter, Zephyr concluded, the Elysian Navy could crush these impudent savages just as easily as they crushed the insolent rebel scum. He would make this Thomas Cook, apparent leader of the human interlopers, regret interfering in imperial affairs. The Eternal Conquest and its fellow Elysian warships would reduce the human fleet to molten slag, drifting in the uncaring void. Their charred corpses and wrecked hulls would serve as a warning to all who dared oppose the Elysian Empire. Zephyr ordered his fleet to engage the human ships, fully expecting a swift victory over the primitive upstarts thanks to superior Elysian technology and firepower. But his arrogant assumptions soon proved disastrously incorrect. The humans were about to teach Zephyr and the Elysians a brutally painful lesson, one they would never forget, if any survived. Zephyr's heart sank as the last of his once mighty warships exploded into a brilliant fireball, the debris joining the scattered remnants of the Elysian fleet, floating lifelessly in space. The human vessels, their hulls scarred but intact, surrounded the Eternal Conquest, weapons locked on the crippled Elysian flagship. In that moment, Zephyr knew he had no choice but to surrender. His pride screamed at him to fight to the bitter end, to go down in a blaze of defiant glory. But his sense of duty to his remaining crew, the brave Elysian soldiers who had fought valiantly against impossible odds, overrode his selfish desire for a warrior's death. With a heavy heart, Zephyr gave the order to stand down and prepare to be boarded. As human marines stormed the Eternal Conquest, rounding up the surviving Elysian crew as prisoners of war, Zephyr found himself being escorted at gunpoint to the hangar bay of the human flagship Indomitable. There, for the first time, he came face to face with his nemesis, Thomas Cook, the human commander who had so thoroughly outmaneuvered and defeated him. Zephyr's icy blue eyes locked onto Cook's steely gaze, the tension between the two leaders crackling like electricity in the air. "You may have won this battle, human, but the Elysian Empire will never submit to your rule," Zephyr hissed, his voice dripping with venom and barely contained rage. Cook, unperturbed by the alien's hostility, simply nodded. "We're not here to conquer you, Zephyr. We're here to end this war and bring stability to the galaxy." As the human and Elysian ships set course for the nearest neutral space station, where negotiations between the warring factions were set to take place, Zephyr's mind raced with thoughts of revenge. He refused to accept this humiliation lying down. Slipping away from his guards during a moment of inattention, Zephyr retrieved a hidden communications device from his uniform. With a few quick taps, he sent a coded message to a network of loyal Elysian agents who had infiltrated the rebel ranks long ago, posing as defectors. "Commence Operation Shadow Strike," Zephyr ordered, his voice a harsh whisper. "Sabotage the peace talks. Assassinate the human and rebel leaders. We will make them pay for this disgrace." Unbeknownst to Zephyr, however, his transmission was not as secure as he believed. In the communications room of the Indomitable, Cook's intelligence officers intercepted the message, quickly decoding its contents. As the peace summit began on the neutral space station, an atmosphere of tension and mistrust hung heavy in the air. Cook, now aware of Zephyr's treachery, found himself navigating a treacherous web of intrigue and deception, working to uncover the full extent of the Elysian plot while desperately trying to keep the fragile negotiations on track. But even as the talks progressed, the rivalry between Cook and Zephyr only intensified. The two leaders clashed repeatedly, engaging in heated arguments and public displays of one-upmanship that threatened to derail the entire peace process. It soon became clear that the fate of the galaxy hinged not only on the outcome of these delicate negotiations, but also on the bitter personal feud between these two warriors, a rivalry that could only be settled through. As the peace negotiations proceeded, Cook's comms unit beeped urgently. He stepped into a secluded alcove and pressed the device to his ear. "Cook here." His intelligence officer's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Sir, we've intercepted Elysian communications. Zephyr's assassins are on the station. They're planning to strike during the treaty signing ceremony." Cook's jaw tightened. He stormed over to Zephyr, who was conversing with his Elysian delegation. Cook grabbed Zephyr's arm and pulled him aside. "Call off your assassins, Zephyr, now!" Zephyr wrenched his arm free, his blue eyes narrowing. "I have no idea what you're talking about, human. I'm not responsible for any assassins." "Don't play dumb with me," Cook growled. "We intercepted your communications. We know they're here, and we know they're yours." Zephyr scoffed. "This is clearly a ploy to sabotage the peace talks. You're trying to frame me and undermine the treaty." The two leaders lunged at each other, ready to come to blows, but their security teams intervened, pulling them apart. Cook shrugged off his guards, his mind racing. The signing ceremony was fast approaching, and he had to act quickly. He gathered his most trusted soldiers and briefed them on the situation. "We have Elysian assassins on the station. They're here to disrupt the peace treaty. We need to track them down and neutralize them before they can strike. Let's move." Cook and his team raced through the station's corridors, checking every suspicious individual and following up on any leads. It was a tense, high-stakes game of cat and mouse as they worked to identify and eliminate the Elysian infiltrators. As they investigated, they uncovered a web of intrigue that went deeper than they had initially suspected. Encrypted files and intercepted transmissions suggested that Zephyr's treachery was just one part of a larger conspiracy within the Elysian ranks, with factions determined to undermine the peace process at any cost. The signing ceremony began, and dignitaries from all sides gathered to witness the historic moment. Cook and his team were running out of time. They burst into a maintenance room, weapons drawn, and found themselves face to face with the final assassin, moments away from executing their plan. A fierce firefight erupted, but Cook and his soldiers emerged victorious. They apprehended the assassin and rushed to the ceremony, arriving just as the final signatures were being applied to the treaty. The crisis had been averted, but Cook knew that this was only the beginning. As the delegates celebrated, he couldn't shake the feeling that his troubles with Zephyr and the Elysian Empire were far from over. In the aftermath of the ceremony, Cook confronted Zephyr in a private room, slamming a datapad with incriminating evidence onto the table. "We have proof of your involvement in the assassination plot. Confess, and maybe the Council will show mercy." Zephyr glared at the evidence, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine, I admit it, I gave the order, but I was acting in the best interests of my people." He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "You think this treaty will bring lasting peace? There are those within the Elysian government who will never accept it. This is only the beginning of a new kind of war, one fought in the shadows." Cook studied his rival, a grudging respect for Zephyr's cunning and determination growing within him, even as he knew that their personal battle was far from over. In the tense aftermath of the treaty signing, Cook and his battle-hardened soldiers found themselves saddled with the unenviable task of transporting their bitter foe Zephyr and his Elysian comrades back to their distant homeworld. The human ships cut through the ravaged void of space, every soul aboard acutely aware that the slightest provocation could shatter the fragile peace. Cook's steely eyes rarely strayed from Zephyr's cell, his instincts screaming that the cunning alien warlord would attempt something. That premonition proved prescient when a fanatical band of Elysian loyalists ambushed the human convoy. Particle beams strafed the human ship's shields and armor as the attackers pressed their assault with suicidal fervor. In the chaos, Zephyr seized his chance. The Elysian leader swiftly neutralized his guards and stormed the hangar, commandeering one of his people's sleek warships. The captured craft's engines flared to life, and the vessel rocketed from the bay. But Cook had anticipated Zephyr's gambit. A concealed tracker aboard the Elysian ship pinged Zephyr's location to the Indomitable's bridge. Cook barked orders to his most elite pilots. "Serpent Squad, you're with me. We're going after that bastard." Blazing thrusters propelled Cook's strike force after their quarry, the human fighters deftly weaving through clouds of debris flung out by the raging skirmish. Zephyr, intimately familiar with his ship's capabilities, pushed his craft to its limits. He jinked through the drifting hulks of gutted warships and skimmed the roiling surface of stellar anomalies. Cook doggedly stuck to Zephyr's ion trail. The breakneck pursuit spanned light years, the ships dancing a lethal ballet through asteroid belts and majestic nebulae. But as the chase wore on, Cook suspected Zephyr had an ulterior motive beyond mere escape. His foe was leading him somewhere. Consulting his network of informants, Cook gleaned Zephyr's probable destination. A top-secret Elysian research outpost sequestered in a heavily defended asteroid field. Dread pooled in Cook's gut at the thought of what diabolical projects his adversary had in the works. Mustering every ship at his disposal, Cook launched a blistering offensive on the Elysian installation. The human fleet smashed through the asteroid field's outer defenses, trading blistering broadsides with the Elysian ships and gun platforms that rose up to oppose them. Zephyr's ship wove through the chaos, making a beeline for the hollowed-out asteroid at the field's heart. Cook, hot on his heels, unleashed an alpha strike that hammered Zephyr's shields and sent the craft careening into the asteroid's docking bay. Both vessels skidded across the hangar deck, hatches slamming open to disgorge human and Elysian alike. Soldiers fanned out, taking cover behind fuel drums and supply crates as withering crossfire filled the cavernous chamber with strobing light and thunderous noise. Cook charged across the bullet-riddled deck, firing his rifle one-handed. Zephyr sprang from behind a shattered bulk loader, loosing a barrage from his sidearm. Energy bolts sizzled past Cook's helmet as he slid into cover, the human commander trading shots with his Elysian counterpart. "It's over, Zephyr," Cook bellowed over the din of combat. "Surrender now and I'll grant you a merciful end." Zephyr's mocking laughter echoed across the hangar. "You'll have to do better than that, Cook." The Elysian's shots hammered Cook's cover, the crate's edges glowing molten. In a burst of movement, Cook vaulted the crate and sprinted for the hangar's personnel door, laying down suppressing fire as he ran. Zephyr broke from cover in pursuit, the two rivals battling through the installation's labyrinthine halls. Strobing emergency lights painted the corridors in shades of red and shadow as the enemies clashed. Cook grudgingly respected Zephyr's combat prowess, even as he strained every sinew to end the Elysian's life. Air grenade detonation hurled them through a pressure door, both soldiers rolling to their feet, in a cavernous chamber dominated by a towering machine of alien design. Zephyr scrambled to an access panel, his fingers flying over the keypad. "Your meddling ends here," Zephyr hissed as the machine thrummed to life. "Behold the Elysian Empire's greatest achievement, a weapon that will burn your species from the stars." Cook lunged at his nemesis, a strangled cry of denial on his lips. The warriors collided in a tangle of limbs, their struggle playing out before the baleful radiance of the Elysian doomsday device. Cook lunged at Zephyr, his fist connecting with the Elysian's jaw. Zephyr staggered back, shaking his head to clear the stars from his vision. The two rivals circled each other, their eyes locked in a fierce battle of wills as they fought for control of the prototype weapon. Cook pressed his advantage, unleashing a flurry of punches and kicks that forced Zephyr onto the defensive. But the Elysian commander was no pushover. He countered Cook's attacks with fluid grace, using his superior strength and agility to stay in the fight. The battle raged across the chamber, the two warriors trading blows and grappling for dominance. Cook's years of training and combat experience served him well, allowing him to anticipate Zephyr's moves and exploit his weaknesses. In a desperate bid to end the fight, Zephyr lunged for the prototype weapon, his fingers brushing against its polished surface. But Cook was faster. He snatched the device away and delivered a crushing blow to Zephyr's temple, sending the Elysian crashing to the floor. But Zephyr's voice stopped him cold. "Wait!" the Elysian gasped, his words slurred by pain and exhaustion. "That device, it's more than just a weapon. It's the key to unlocking an ancient power hidden on my home world." Cook hesitated, his curiosity piqued despite his better judgment. "What kind of power?" Zephyr struggled to his feet, his eyes blazing with intensity. "A technology so advanced it could change the course of galactic history. It could bring peace and prosperity to both our peoples, if only we worked together." Cook studied his rival's face, searching for any hint of deception. But Zephyr's expression was one of genuine conviction, tinged with a desperate hope. Against his instincts, Cook lowered the prototype weapon. "I'm listening," he said, his voice guarded but open. Zephyr nodded, relief flooding his features. "We need to get out of here first. My people have no idea what I've discovered. They'll try to stop us." Cook grimaced, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. He activated his comm unit and barked orders to his team, instructing them to prepare for extraction. "This had better not be a trick," he growled, jabbing a finger at Zephyr's chest. Together, the two rivals made their way out of the chamber, the prototype weapon secured in Cook's pack. They emerged into a scene of chaos, alarms blaring and security forces rushing to respond to the intrusion. Cook and Zephyr fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized as they cut a path through the Elysian defenses. Energy bolts sizzled past their heads as they ducked and weaved, returning fire with deadly precision. They battled through corridors and control rooms, disabling automated turrets and neutralizing squads of heavily armed soldiers. The air grew thick with the stench of ozone and burning metal, the floor slick with blood and hydraulic fluid. As they neared the facility's hangar bay, Cook activated his comm unit once more. "Indomitable, this is Cook, requesting immediate extraction, and have a team of scientists and diplomats standing by. We're going to the Elysian homeworld." The Indomitable's reply crackled through the static. "Understood, Commander. Extraction team is en route. Diplomatic personnel will be ready upon your return." Cook cut the transmission and glanced at Zephyr, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Looks like we're in this together now, whether we like it or not." Zephyr chuckled, his laughter tinged with exhaustion and relief. "Just try to keep up, human." They burst into the hangar bay, energy bolts stitching the walls around them. Cook's extraction team was waiting, their weapons at the ready as they provided covering fire. The dropship rocketed out of the hangar, the Indomitable's guns laying down a blistering barrage to cover their escape. Cook slumped against the bulkhead, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the adrenaline began to fade. Zephyr sat across from him, his eyes distant as he contemplated the enormity of what they had just set in motion. The journey to the Elysian homeworld was just beginning, and the challenges that awaited them were unlike anything either of them had ever faced before. As the dropship docked with the Indomitable, Cook and Zephyr emerged to a reception of wary glances and hushed whispers. The sight of a human commander and an Elysian warrior working together was enough to give even the most seasoned veterans pause. Cook ignored the stares and made his way to the bridge, Zephyr following close behind. They had a mission to plan and a galaxy to save. The journey to the Elysian homeworld was tense and uncertain, the crew of the Indomitable on high alert for any sign of trouble. But as they entered orbit around the planet, Cook couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the sight that greeted them. The Elysian capital was a marvel of architecture and engineering, its towering spires and gleaming domes reaching towards the heavens. But even from this distance, Cook could sense the underlying tension that gripped the city. As they made their approach, a fleet of Elysian warships moved to intercept them, their weapons charged and ready. Cook's hand hovered over the Indomitable's firing controls, ready to give the order to open fire if necessary. But Zephyr stepped forward, his voice calm and assured as he hailed the Elysian fleet. "This is Commander Zephyr of the Elysian Navy. I am returning with a delegation from the Human Alliance on a mission of peace. Stand down and allow us to land." There was a moment of tense silence, the seconds stretching out like an eternity. Then, to Cook's surprise, the Elysian ships began to pull back, clearing a path for the Indomitable to land. As they touched down on the outskirts of the city, Cook and Zephyr were greeted by a delegation of Elysian officials, their expressions ranging from cautious optimism to outright hostility. Cook stepped forward, his hand outstretched in a gesture of peace. "I am Commander Thomas Cook of the Human Alliance. We come in peace, seeking to forge a new understanding between our peoples." The Elysian Prime Minister, a tall, regal-looking woman with piercing blue eyes, studied Cook for a long moment before speaking. "Your presence here is highly irregular, Commander Cook. Many among my people see it as a threat to our sovereignty and way of life." Cook nodded, his expression grave. "I understand your concerns, Prime Minister, but we have reason to believe that there is an ancient technology hidden on your world, one that could change the course of galactic history. We seek to unlock its secrets for the benefit of all our peoples." The Prime Minister's eyes narrowed, her gaze shifting to Zephyr. "And what role does Commander Zephyr play in this endeavor?" Zephyr stepped forward, his chin held high. "I have seen the potential for peace and prosperity that this technology represents. I believe that by working together, we can achieve a new era of understanding and cooperation between our peoples." The Prime Minister was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally she spoke, her voice cold and hard. "Very well. You may proceed with your investigation. But know this, Commander Cook. If you betray the trust that has been placed in you, the consequences will be severe." Cook bowed his head in acknowledgement, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty. But as he glanced at Zephyr, he saw the same determination and resolve that he felt burning within himself. Together, they would uncover the secrets of the ancient technology and forge a new future for their peoples. As they made their way into the heart of the Elysian capital, Cook and Zephyr were met with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion from the city's inhabitants. Some regarded them with open hostility, their eyes narrowed in distrust and anger. Others seemed more receptive, their expressions curious and hopeful as they watched the strange procession make its way through the streets. Cook and Zephyr were escorted to a secure facility deep within the city, where a team of Elysian scientists and engineers awaited them. The room was filled with advanced technology, holographic displays, and sleek, gleaming machines that hummed with barely contained power. At the center of the room stood a towering structure, its surface etched with intricate symbols and glyphs that seemed to shift and dance in the light. Cook felt a shiver run down his spine as he gazed upon it, a sense of ancient mystery and power emanating from its very core. The lead researcher, a slender, silver-haired woman with piercing green eyes, stepped forward. "Very little, I'm afraid," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "We've been studying this artifact for decades, but we've barely scratched the surface of its true potential." Cook frowned, his mind racing with possibilities. The technology we discovered on the research station, could it be connected to this somehow? Zephyr nodded, his expression thoughtful. I believe so. The symbols on the device match those on this structure almost perfectly. The researcher's eyes widened, her expression one of shock and disbelief. "You have a functioning piece of this technology?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. Cook reached into his pack and pulled out the prototype weapon, its surface glinting in the light. "We believe so, but we don't fully understand how it works, or what its true purpose is." Cook and Zephyr exchanged a glance, their expressions grave. They both knew that unlocking the secrets of this technology would not be easy, and that the road ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty. But they also knew that the stakes had never been higher, and that the fate of the galaxy itself hung in the balance. Together, they would unravel the mysteries of the ancients and forge a new future for their peoples. As they delved deeper into the secrets of the ancient technology, Cook and Zephyr found themselves drawn into a web of intrigue and deception that stretched across the stars. They uncovered evidence of a long-forgotten race of advanced beings whose empire had once spanned the galaxy. These beings had possessed technology far beyond anything the humans or Elysians had ever seen, capable of manipulating the very fabric of space and time itself. But they had vanished millennia ago, leaving behind only scattered ruins and cryptic clues to their existence. Cook and Zephyr became convinced that unlocking the full potential of this technology was the key to bringing lasting peace and prosperity to the galaxy. But they also knew that they were not the only ones seeking its power. Rival factions within both the human and Elysian governments sought to claim the technology for themselves, seeing it as a means to assert their dominance over the other races of the galaxy. And there were whispers of even more sinister forces at work, ancient enemies of the long-forgotten race, who sought to use their technology for their own nefarious purposes. As they raced against time to gather the remaining pieces of the puzzle, Cook and Zephyr found themselves forced to confront their own prejudices and distrust. They had spent their entire lives on opposite sides of a bitter conflict, taught to hate and fear one another from birth. But as they worked together, they began to see each other in a new light. They realized that they were not so different after all, that they shared the same hopes and dreams for a better future. And as they stood on the brink of unlocking the full potential of the ancient technology, they knew that they would have to make a choice. They could use this power to dominate and control, to crush their enemies and assert their own supremacy over the galaxy. Or they could use it to bring about a new era of peace and understanding, to forge a new alliance between their peoples and build a better future for all. The weight of this decision hung heavy on their shoulders as they made their final preparations, the fate of the galaxy itself hanging in the balance. But as they looked into each other's eyes, they knew that they had already made their choice. Together they would use this technology to bring about a new age of enlightenment and cooperation, to build a galaxy where all races could live in harmony and prosperity. And though the road ahead was long and uncertain, they knew that they would face it side by side, united in their determination to create a better future for all. As Cook and Zephyr delved deeper into the mysteries surrounding the ancient technology, their quest led them to the lawless world of Neptus 7. Disguised as battle-hardened mercenaries, they ventured into the planet's seedy underbelly, navigating a treacherous maze of rival gangs and criminal syndicates. In a dimly lit tavern, Cook and Zephyr huddled over a table, poring over a stolen datapad containing information about the artifact's location. The air hung heavy with the stench of cheap liquor and stale sweat. "We need to move fast," Cook muttered, his eyes darting around the room. "If word gets out about what we're after, every lowlife on this rock will be gunning for us." Zephyr nodded, his gaze fixed on the datapad. "Agreed, but we can't do this alone. We need someone with local knowledge, someone who can help us navigate the planet's underworld." As if on cue, a figure emerged from the shadows and slid into the booth beside them. "I hear you boys are looking for something valuable," a female voice purred. Cook and Zephyr looked up to see a striking woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes. She wore a form-fitting black bodysuit, a blaster pistol strapped to her thigh. "Name's Zara Vex," she said, flashing a predatory grin, "and I think I might be just the person you're looking for." Cook eyed her warily. "We're not interested in partners." Zara laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, but you will be. See, I know this planet like the back of my hand, and I've got connections that could make your little treasure hunt a whole lot easier." Zephyr leaned forward, intrigued. "What's in it for you?" "A share of the spoils, of course," Zara replied, her eyes glinting with avarice. "Whatever it is you're after, it must be worth a fortune, and I want in." Cook shook his head. "No deal, we work alone." But Zephyr held up a hand, silencing his partner. "Wait, she might be useful. We're flying blind here, Cook. We need all the help we can get." Cook glared at Zephyr, his jaw clenched tight. But he knew the Elysian was right. They were out of their depth on Neptus 7, and Zara's expertise could be invaluable. "Fine," he growled, turning back to Zara. "But if you double-cross us, I'll personally put a bullet between your eyes." Zara's grin widened, her teeth gleaming in the dim light. "Oh, I like you already." As the unlikely trio set out to track down the artifact, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Cook couldn't shake the feeling that Zara was hiding something, her motives as murky as the polluted skies of Neptus 7. Zephyr, too, seemed on edge, his eyes constantly darting to Zara, as if expecting a knife in the back at any moment. Cook sensed a history between the two, a deep-seated animosity that threatened to boil over at the slightest provocation. But for now they needed each other. The artifact was their top priority, and they would stop at nothing to secure it. Their search led them deep into the bowels of the planet, to an ancient buried city long forgotten by the galaxy at large. The air grew thick and stale as they descended into the ruins, the walls etched with strange alien glyphs. Zara took the lead, her knowledge of the city's layout proving invaluable as they navigated the twisting corridors and crumbling chambers. But even her expertise couldn't prepare them for the horrors that awaited them. As they delved deeper into the city, they triggered a series of deadly traps, ancient mechanisms designed to protect the artifact from would-be thieves. Razor-sharp blades sliced through the air, while jets of searing flame erupted from the walls. Cook and Zephyr fought side by side, their weapons blazing as they cut down the robotic sentinels that guarded the city's secrets. Zara, too, proved her worth, her blaster finding its mark with uncanny precision. In a final, desperate confrontation, Cook, Zephyr, and Zara faced off against Crag and his thugs, the ancient city crumbling around them as they exchanged blistering volleys of blaster fire. In the end, they emerged victorious, the artifact clutched tightly in Cook's hands, but their triumph was short-lived. As they made their way back to the surface, Zara turned on them, her blaster leveled at Cook's head. "Hand it over," she snarled, her eyes cold and hard. Cook and Zephyr exchanged a glance, their weapons trained on Zara. They had known this moment would come, but the betrayal still stung. "How you don't want to do this, Zara?" Cook said, his voice low and dangerous. In a flash, she snatched the artifact from Cook's grasp and fled, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Cook and Zephyr gave chase, but it was too late. Zara had outmaneuvered them, leaving them to die in the crumbling ruins of the ancient city. Battered and bruised, Cook and Zephyr dragged themselves back to the surface, their hearts heavy with the weight of their failure. They had come so close to securing the artifact, only to have it slip through their fingers at the last moment. But as they licked their wounds and planned their next move, they realized that their mission had become about more than just the artifact. Zara's betrayal had shown them the true stakes of their quest, the lengths to which their enemies would go to claim the ancient technology for themselves. This was no longer just a race to secure a powerful artifact. It was a battle for the very soul of the galaxy, a struggle against the forces of greed and ambition that threatened to tear the universe apart. And Cook and Zephyr knew that they would stop at nothing to see it through, no matter the cost. Battered and bloodied, Cook and Zephyr limped back to their ship, the stolen artifact clutched tightly in their hands. The acrid stench of burning metal and plastic filled the air as the research station collapsed in on itself, consumed by the very forces it had sought to control. "We can't let her get away," Cook growled, his voice raw with exhaustion and anger. "Zara's too dangerous with that kind of power." Zephyr nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the readouts on the ship's console. "I'm tracking her warp signature. She's headed for the Zelos system, on the edge of Elysian space." Cook slammed his fist against the bulkhead, wincing as pain lanced through his battered knuckles. "Then that's where we're going. We'll hunt her down and take back what's ours." The ship shuddered as it tore through the fabric of space, the stars blurring into streaks of light as they hurtled towards their destination. Cook and Zephyr worked feverishly to repair the damage they had sustained in the battle, patching hull breaches and rerouting power to the failing systems. As they drew closer to the Zelos system, they picked up a faint distress signal emanating from a small rocky moon orbiting a gas giant. The signal was weak and distorted, but the message was clear. Zara was here, and she was in trouble. Cook and Zephyr exchanged a wary glance, both knowing that it could be a trap, but they also knew that they couldn't afford to let Zara slip through their fingers again. They landed their ship on the moon's surface, the rocky terrain churning beneath the thrusters. The air was thick with volcanic ash and sulphurous fumes, and the ground trembled with the force of the moon's unstable core. As they stepped out onto the surface, they were met with a sight that made their blood run cold. A massive, heavily fortified research station loomed before them, its gleaming metal walls bristling with weapons and defense systems. "Looks like Zara's found some new friends," Cook muttered, his grip tightening on his blaster. Zephyr's eyes narrowed as he studied the station's defenses. Elysian scientists from the looks of it, rogue elements who've been working on unlocking the secrets of the ancient technology. Cook cursed under his breath. "We need to get inside and find out what they're up to." But infiltrating the station would be no easy feat. The defenses were formidable, and Cook and Zephyr were heavily outnumbered and outgunned. They needed a plan, and fast. Cook's eyes fell on a group of rough-looking mercenaries and pirates milling about near the station's entrance. They wore the same insignia as Zara's followers, and they carried an assortment of deadly weapons. "I have an idea," Cook said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "We'll pose as new recruits for Zara's army. Once we're inside, we can sabotage their efforts and find out what they're really up to." Zephyr hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot." They approached the mercenaries cautiously, their hands held out in a gesture of surrender. The leader of the group, a burly human with a face like a slab of granite, eyed them suspiciously. "Who are you?" he demanded, his hand resting on the butt of his blaster. "We're here to join up with Zara's crew," Cook said smoothly, his voice taking on a rough mercenary drawl. "Heard she was looking for some new blood." The mercenary leader studied them for a long moment, his eyes narrowed in suspicion, but finally he nodded. "All right, you're in. But you step out of line, and I'll put a bolt through your head myself." Cook and Zephyr followed the mercenaries into the station, their hearts pounding with adrenaline and anticipation. They knew they were walking into the lion's den, but they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy depended on them. As they moved deeper into the station, Cook and Zephyr began to notice strange and disturbing signs. The walls were lined with tanks and tubes filled with bubbling viscous fluids, and the air was thick with the stench of chemicals and decay. They passed by a series of laboratories, each one more nightmarish than the last. Through the reinforced glass windows, they could see Elysian scientists working feverishly on strange and twisted experiments, their faces contorted with a kind of manic glee. In one lab, they saw a group of captured rebels strapped to operating tables, their bodies writhing in agony as the scientists pumped them full of glowing, pulsing fluids. In another, they saw civilians being fitted with cybernetic implants and augmentations, their screams echoing through the halls. Cook felt a surge of revulsion and anger rising in his gut. These scientists were monsters, twisting the ancient technology to their own cruel and twisted ends. He and Zephyr exchanged a grim look, Both knowing what they had to do, they began to sabotage the scientists' efforts, planting computer viruses and stealing key components whenever they had the chance. They worked quickly and quietly, always staying one step ahead of the station's security forces. But as they delved deeper into the heart of the station, they uncovered a truth that made their blood run cold. The lead scientist, a brilliant but twisted Elysian named Dr. Zane, was using the ancient technology to create an army of augmented super soldiers, fusing the captured rebels and civilians with the very technology they had sworn to destroy. Cook and Zephyr knew they had to put a stop to Dr. Zane's madness, no matter the cost. They redoubled their efforts, working tirelessly to destroy the research station and retrieve the stolen artifact. But their sabotage did not go unnoticed, and soon they found themselves on the run from Zara's forces and the station's security personnel. In a desperate gambit, they managed to corner Dr. Zane in his laboratory, ready to put an end to his twisted experiments once and for all. But when they burst through the doors, they found themselves facing off against a monstrous, augmented version of the scientist, his body fused with the ancient technology in a grotesque parody of life. Dr. Zane lunged at them, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as he unleashed a barrage of energy blasts from his augmented limbs. Cook and Zephyr fought back with everything they had, their weapons blazing as they dodged and weaved around the scientist's attacks. The battle was brutal and high stakes, with both sides taking heavy damage. But in the end, Cook and Zephyr emerged victorious, their weapons finding their mark and sending Dr. Zane crumpling to the ground in a heap of twisted metal and flesh. They barely had time to catch their breath before the station's alarms began to blare, warning of an imminent self-destruct sequence. Cook and Zephyr raced through the halls, dodging debris and explosions as they made their way back to their ship. But as they reached the hangar bay, they saw Zara's ship blasting off into the distance, the stolen artifact glinting in its hold. They had been too late. As the station exploded behind them, Cook and Zephyr could only watch as Zara and her followers disappeared into the void of space. They knew that their mission was far from over, and that Zara's plans for the ancient technology posed an even greater threat to the galaxy than they had ever imagined. Battered, bruised, but unbroken, they set out to chase down Zara and her army, determined to stop her before she could unleash the full power of the artifact upon the unsuspecting galaxy. The fate of countless worlds hung in the balance, and Cook and Zephyr knew that they were the only ones who could stop Zara and her twisted vision of the future. Cook and Zephyr's hunt for Zara brought them to a colossal abandoned space station circling a dying star. The once thriving center of trade and negotiation had been seized by Zara and her troops, who now used it as a headquarters to amass power and enlist new soldiers. Zephyr, relying on his familiarity with Elysian tech, crafted a scheme to sneak aboard the station by commandeering an incoming supply ship. Cook, utilizing his battle prowess and command skills, gathered a strike force of their closest comrades, including rebel fighters and elite human commandos. As one, they launched a bold assault on the station, blasting through swarms of Zara's hired guns and robotic security. Cook and Zephyr spearheaded the charge, Cook's rifle spitting plasma bolts, while Zephyr's hooked blades sliced through metal and flesh. "Push forward," Cook roared over the chaos of battle. "We have to reach the control center." Zephyr nodded, his face grim as he dispatched another mercenary. "Zara will be waiting for us." Fighting deeper into the station's heart, they uncovered the horrifying truth. Zara had been exploiting the ancient tech to brainwash her followers, molding them into fanatical servants. Cook's blood ran cold as he saw the blank, soulless stares of the mind-controlled soldiers. They also discovered Zara's endgame. She intended to use the stolen artifact to awaken a dormant network of ancient superweapons hidden across the galaxy. With that power at her command, she would be unstoppable. "We can't let that happen," Cook growled. "This ends now." Leading their team in a final, desperate charge, Cook and Zephyr stormed the control room. There they confronted Zara herself, flanked by her most elite warriors. The Pirate Queen sneered at them, her eyes glinting with malice. Cook and Zephyr lunged at their nemesis, engaging in a brutal hand-to-hand brawl as their forces clashed around them. Cook's fists hammered into Zara's jaw, while Zephyr's blades locked with her crackling energy staff. The battle was fierce and bloody, but in the end, Cook and Zephyr emerged victorious. Zara lay broken at their feet, her mind control devices smashed to scrap. But their triumph was short-lived. In the fighting, the ancient artifact had been damaged. A deep, resonant hum filled the air as, across the galaxy, long-forgotten weapons platforms stirred to life, their terrible energies building to unleash apocalyptic destruction. Cook and Zephyr shared a look of dread. They had mere moments to stop the unfolding catastrophe, even as Zara's freshly freed armies milled about in confusion, turning to the human and Elysian leaders for guidance. The weight of command settled heavily on Cook and Zephyr's shoulders as they raced to avert galactic annihilation. The battle may have been won, but their greatest challenge was just beginning. Cook's fingers flew across the control room's console, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to make sense of the alien technology. The ancient symbols and glyphs seemed to mock him, their meanings frustratingly opaque. Beside him, Zephyr worked feverishly to decipher the technical readouts, his knowledge of Elysian systems pushed to its limits. The hum of the awakening weapons platforms grew louder, the vibrations shaking the very bones of the station. "I can't shut it down," Cook growled, slamming his fist against the unyielding metal. The damage to the artifact must have triggered some kind of failsafe. Zephyr's eyes widened as a sudden realization struck him. "The power core," he breathed. "If we can overload the station's power core, it might send out an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to fry the weapons platform's circuitry." Cook nodded grimly, already plotting the fastest route to the station's reactor chamber. "It's our only chance, let's move." They raced through the station's twisting corridors, dodging debris and sparking cables, as the structure shuddered under the strain of the building energy. Around them, Zara's former thralls stumbled about in a daze, their minds still grappling with the sudden absence of her controlling influence. Some lashed out in confusion and anger, attacking Cook and Zephyr's team with wild abandon. Others simply collapsed, their bodies racked with sobs as the enormity of their actions under Zara's control crashed down upon them. Cook and Zephyr pushed forward, their team forming a protective cordon around them as they fought their way to the power core. The reactor chamber was a cavernous space, dominated by a massive, pulsating sphere of energy that cast eerie shadows across the walls. "We need to overload the containment field," Zephyr shouted over the deafening hum. "But the controls are on the other side of the chamber." Cook gritted his teeth, his eyes scanning the room for any advantage. They would have to cross a narrow catwalk suspended over a churning sea of radioactive coolant, all while the station bucked and shuddered around them. "I'll go," he said, his voice hard with determination. "Keep those mercenaries off my back." Zephyr nodded, his expression grim. "Don't die on me, Cook. We've come too far for that." Cook flashed him a reckless grin, then sprinted out onto the catwalk, his boots pounding against the metal grating. Energy blasts sizzled past him as Zara's remaining loyalists poured into the chamber, determined to stop them at any cost. Zephyr and the rest of the team took up defensive positions, their weapons blazing as they fought to buy Cook the time he needed. The human commander dodged and weaved, his reflexes pushed to their limits as he danced through the hail of fire. With a final desperate lunge, Cook reached the control panel and slammed his fist down on the emergency override. The containment field flickered and died, and the power core began to swell, tendrils of crackling energy lashing out in all directions. "Get clear!" Cook roared, already racing back across the catwalk as the core reached critical mass. The team fell back, fighting every step of the way as they retreated to the hangar bay. They piled into their waiting ships, the engines roaring to life as they blasted away from the doomed station. Behind them, the power core detonated in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave rippling outward in a tsunami of electromagnetic force. Across the galaxy, ancient weapons platforms shuddered and went dark, their terrible energies dissipating harmlessly into the void. In the aftermath of the battle, Cook and Zephyr found themselves surrounded by a ragtag fleet of ships, crewed by the lost and the desperate, the former thralls of Zara's mind control. Cook and Zephyr knew that these lost souls would be vital allies in the battles to come, but first they would need guidance, purpose, and a chance to forge their own destinies. As the ragtag fleet set course for the nearest friendly outpost, Cook and Zephyr began the hard work of building trust and cooperation among their new allies. It wasn't easy. Many of Zara's former thralls were deeply traumatized by their experiences, and old rivalries and prejudices still simmered beneath the surface. But Cook and Zephyr led by example, putting aside their own differences and working together to create a sense of common purpose. They organized joint training exercises, encouraging the humans, Elysians, and rebels to share their skills and knowledge. They held long, difficult conversations, listening to each other's stories and perspectives, and slowly, a new understanding began to emerge. As the days turned into weeks, the fleet began to coalesce into a true fighting force, united by a shared commitment to justice and freedom. And when they finally arrived at the outpost, ready to take the fight to the remaining pockets of resistance and oppression, Cook and Zephyr knew that they had forged more than just an alliance. They had created a new family. But even as they celebrated their hard-won victories, Cook and Zephyr knew that their work was far from over. The ancient weapons platforms, though damaged and unstable, still posed a grave threat to the galaxy, and they needed to be shut down before they could cause any more destruction. With time running out, Cook and Zephyr split their forces to tackle the crisis on multiple fronts. Cook took a team of human engineers and technicians to the nearest weapons platform, hoping to find a way to shut down the system at its source. Meanwhile, Zephyr led a group of Elysian warriors and rebel fighters to defend key strategic locations from the impending onslaught of the ancient weapons. As Cook and his team fought their way through the heavily defended platform, they discovered that the technology was far more advanced and complex than anything they had encountered before. The platform was protected by an army of robotic sentinels and a labyrinthine network of security systems that seemed to anticipate their every move. Cook ducked behind a bulkhead as a barrage of plasma bolts sizzled overhead, the acrid stench of ozone filling his nostrils. Beside him, a human engineer named Jax cursed under her breath as she worked frantically to bypass a security lockout on a nearby control panel. "Any progress?" Cook shouted over the din of battle, his rifle bucking in his hands as he returned fire at the advancing robots. Jax shook her head, her face tight with concentration. "This code is like nothing I've ever seen before. It's adapting faster than I can hack it." Cook gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a new plan. They were running out of time, and every second they spent fighting these robotic defenders was another second that the weapons platforms had to wreak havoc across the galaxy. Undeterred, Cook and his team pressed on, using every trick and tactic at their disposal to breach the platform's defenses and reach its central control core. They blasted through walls, rerouted power systems, and even used the robotic sentinels' own weapons against them. Meanwhile, Zephyr and his forces found themselves locked in a desperate battle against the devastating power of the ancient weapons. The platforms, now fully activated, unleashed a barrage of energy beams, missile strikes, and gravitational anomalies that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of space and time. Zephyr stood on the bridge of his flagship, his eyes narrowed as he watched the chaos unfolding on the viewscreen. The Elysian homeworld hung in the void before him, its surface already scarred by the relentless onslaught of the ancient weapons. The crew scrambled to obey, their faces taut with fear and determination. Zephyr knew that they were outmatched, that the ancient weapons were far more powerful than anything they had ever faced before, but he also knew that they had no choice but to fight, to buy Cook and his team the time they needed to shut down the platforms. Drawing on his intimate knowledge of Elysian battle tactics and his own innate cunning, Zephyr managed to keep his forces one step ahead of the destruction, but at a terrible cost in lives and resources. Ships exploded into fireballs of debris, consumed by the relentless barrage of the ancient weapons. Fighters spun out of control, their pilots' screams cut short as they vanished into the void. Back on the platform, Cook and his team finally broke through to the control core, their armor battered and scorched from the relentless fighting. But as they approached the central console, they realized that they were facing an impossible choice. The damage to the artifact had triggered a fail-safe mechanism that threatened to overload the entire network, potentially destroying every star system in its path. The only way to stop it was to initiate a complete system shutdown, but doing so would also disable the ancient technology that powered many of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, including Earth and the Elysian homeworld. Cook stared at the console, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what he had to do, but the weight of the decision threatened to crush him. To save the galaxy, he would have to sacrifice everything he had ever known, everything he had ever fought for. Beside him, Jax placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but insistent. "You have to do it, Cook, there's no other way." In that moment, Cook realized that the only way forward was to trust in the strength and resilience of all the galaxy's inhabitants, human and alien alike. They had come this far together, and they would face whatever challenges lay ahead as one. With a heavy heart, Cook initiated the shutdown sequence, his fingers flying across the console as he entered the final commands. The platform shuddered beneath his feet, the lights flickering and dimming as the ancient technology began to power down. Across the galaxy, the weapons platforms fell silent, their destructive energies dissipating into the void. On countless worlds, people looked up in wonder and relief as the sky cleared and the ground stopped shaking. And on the bridge of his flagship, Zephyr watched as the Elysian homeworld emerged from the chaos unscathed, a smile spreading across his face as he realized what Cook had done. He had sacrificed everything to save them all, to give them a chance at a new beginning. As the crisis abated and the galaxy began to pick up the pieces, Cook and Zephyr reunited to survey the aftermath of their actions. They stood on a hill overlooking the shattered remains of the weapons platform, the smoke still rising from its ruined structures. For a long moment they were silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Zephyr turned to Cook, his eyes shining with a newfound respect. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved us all." Cook shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it, Zephyr, together, just like we always have." They clasped hands, their grip strong and unwavering. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be challenges and obstacles at every turn. But they also knew that they had each other, and that together they could face anything the universe threw at them. As they turned to head back to their ships, ready to begin the long process of rebuilding and healing, Cook and Zephyr knew that they had forged an unbreakable bond of trust and respect that would guide them through whatever lay ahead. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: they would face it side by side as brothers in arms. Cook and Zephyr stood shoulder to shoulder, gazing out at the shattered remnants of the galaxy they had fought so hard to save. The ancient weapons platforms lay dormant, their destructive power silenced by the sacrifice Cook had made. But the scars of the conflict ran deep, and the road to recovery would be long and arduous. Together, they threw themselves into the monumental task of rebuilding, working tirelessly to forge a new era of cooperation and understanding between the disparate species and civilizations that called the galaxy home. They convened a galactic council, a forum where representatives from every corner of the universe could come together to discuss their shared challenges and aspirations. But even as they poured their hearts and souls into this noble endeavor, Cook and Zephyr found themselves beset on all sides by forces that sought to undermine their efforts. Old grudges and rivalries, long suppressed by the iron grip of the ancient technology, now bubbled to the surface, threatening to tear apart the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build. In the halls of power, whispers of discontent and rebellion grew louder with each passing day. Assassins lurked in the shadows, their blades poised to strike at the slightest sign of weakness. Cook and Zephyr found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, never knowing who they could trust. As they delved deeper into the web of intrigue that threatened to engulf them, Cook and Zephyr uncovered a terrifying truth. A shadowy cabal of Elysian hardliners and human supremacists, united by their hatred of the New Order, were plotting to sabotage the Council and reignite the flames of war. Desperate to prevent another catastrophic conflict, Cook and Zephyr hatched a daring plan. They would infiltrate the cabal from within, posing as sympathizers to their cause, and gather the evidence they needed to expose their nefarious schemes to the galaxy at large. But they knew they could not do it alone. They reached out to a group of unlikely allies, individuals who had once been their bitterest enemies, but who now shared their vision of a united and peaceful future. Among them was Zara Vex, the former pirate queen who had seen the error of her ways, and Dr. Zane, the renegade Elysian scientist who had once sought to unleash the ancient technology's destructive power. Together, this motley crew of heroes set out to unravel the conspiracy, following a trail of clues that led them from the glittering spires of the galactic capital to the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. But with each step they took, they found themselves drawn deeper into a web of lies and deceit that threatened to consume them all. As they raced to stay one step ahead of their enemies, Cook and Zephyr came to a horrifying realization. The Cabal's true goal was not simply to destroy the Council, but to seize control of the ancient technology for themselves. With that power at their fingertips, they would be unstoppable, able to bend the galaxy to their will and crush anyone who dared to stand in their way. In a last desperate gambit, Cook and Zephyr devised a plan to lure the Cabal's leaders out into the open, using themselves as bait. They allowed themselves to be captured, taken to a secret base on a remote, uninhabited planet, where they knew the Cabal's mastermind would be waiting. And there, in the heart of the enemy stronghold, they came face to face with a ghost from their past. General Zahn, the Elysian warlord who had been presumed dead in the final days of the war, stood before them, his eyes blazing with hatred and madness. In a brutal, no-holds-barred battle that pushed them to their very limits, Cook and Zephyr fought with everything they had, matching Zahn and his elite guard blow for blow. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, searing flesh and scorching metal as they danced a deadly waltz across the blood-soaked ground. But even as they emerged victorious, their triumph was tinged with tragedy. Zephyr, his body broken and bleeding, collapsed into Cook's arms, the life slowly ebbing from his shattered frame. With his final breath, he spoke the words that Cook had never dared to hope for, a confession of the bond that had grown between them, forged in the crucible of war and tempered by the unbreakable ties of brotherhood. As Zephyr slipped away, he extracted one last promise from his human comrade. Cook would carry on their work, building a better future for all the peoples of the galaxy, no matter the cost. And with a heavy heart, Cook agreed, knowing that he would bear the weight of that promise for the rest of his days. Alone on the bridge of his ship, Cook stared out at the stars, the vastness of space stretching out before him like an endless sea. The road ahead would be long and hard, fraught with dangers and challenges that he could scarcely imagine, but he knew that he would face them all, carrying with him the legacy of all those who had fought and died for the dream of a better tomorrow. With a heavy heart but an unbreakable resolve, Cook plotted a course for the Galactic Council, ready to take on whatever the future might bring. He would honor Zephyr's memory and all those who had sacrificed everything for the cause of peace and unity, and he would never rest until that dream was finally made real, no matter how long it took or how much it cost him. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.